This is the 13th volume of the quest, and the second of the frontier books, and it exists to pay a debt. At the end of the water book, I traced the molecules of life back through the rivers and the comets and the cold interstellar clouds, and then I stopped at the one span I had never dared to build, the step from lifeless chemistry to a living thing, the unclosed arch of the whole series. This book walks up to that arch at full strength and asks how life began, and whether it began anywhere but here. I have to say at the outset the plain fact everything else in these pages stands upon, because it admits no ornament. In roughly 70 years of dedicated, brilliant, well-funded work, no one has made life from non-life. We can make the parts. We cannot make the thing. That gap is the subject. I wrote it the way I have written all the others, as a juror and not an advocate, grading every load-bearing claim by the strength of the evidence rather than the thrill of it. I run each open question through 3 moves: the claim stated plainly, the place where it meets the hard edge and stops, and the specific observation that would settle it. And I sort the results into tiers I have kept since the middle volumes. What is established and mechanistically understood? What is a serious contested frontier that working scientists actively fight over? What is a speculative bridge that is plausible in principle but not demonstrated? And the plainer verdict for claims the evidence simply will not bear. Beneath all of it lies the constraint that is the true spine of the book, the one I call the sample of one. We reason about the origin and distribution of life from a single instance, our own, and a sample of one cannot tell us whether life is a near inevitable chemistry or a fantastically lucky accident. That n=1 problem cuts every grand claim in the volume, and it is why a book on the origin of life must also be a book on the search for others. A second example found on any world would break the sample open. That is why the 2 halves are graded by the same rules. The book moves in 7 parts. The first states the problem, what life even is, and why the word at the center of the inquiry resists definition, why thermodynamics, in Schrödinger's and Prigoghine's hands, gives the clearest picture we have of a structure that drinks order and excretes disorder, and what the century of the spark from Miller and Urey forward has actually delivered. I credit that century generously because the inventory of prebiotic building blocks, amino acids, nucleobases, sugars, the components of membranes, forming readily under plausible early Earth conditions, is genuinely magnificent and firmly established. Then I name the discontinuities that stand between the parts and the thing, precisely because vagueness serves the enthusiast and the scold alike. The water paradox that makes long chains fight the sea, the homochirality that life cannot do without, and dead chemistry never hands you cleanly, the concentration problem of a broth too thin to react, and Benner's tar pit, the slide toward gunk that I find the least answerable and most bracing objection in the field. The whole prebiotic frontier I grade as serious, funded, moving, and not yet carrying its keystone. The second part lays the 4 serious programs side by side and cross-examines each. The warm little pond, Darwin's unpublished phrase made into real chemistry by Sutherland's cyanosulfidic network and Deemer's wet and dry hot springs, with the sun for an energy source. The alkaline vent of Russell and Martin and Lane, where lost cities' porous chimneys act as natural batteries, and life inherits the proton gradient that Peter Mitchell's once derided chemiosmosis showed every cell still runs on. The RNA world, the strongest single card in the deck, resting on the discovery that RNA can both carry information and catalyze. The ribozyme, the RNA heart of the ribosome, a molecular fossil of a lost age, though no one has yet built the copier the whole scheme requires. And the old quarrel of metabolism first against replication first, which I argue the field is dissolving into a systems chemistry truce that suspects the either-or was always false. I steelman each and then turn on it, and I grade the whole tournament a live frontier because not one program has been carried end-to-end in any laboratory. The third part follows chemistry up into the cell, Zostak's fatty acid vesicles that assemble themselves for free and compete in a Darwinian miniature, the membrane that becomes a capacitor and holds a voltage the instant there is a boundary, the genetic takeover and the astonishing near-universal code, and the last universal common ancestor, Luca, read from the root of the only tree we have and used as the empirical anchor that disciplines every upstream story. The fourth part confronts the sample of one head-on, necessary versus contingent, whether life could run on other chemistries or other solvents, whether a shadow biosphere with a second origin might be under our feet unrecognized, and how the rare Earth hypothesis squares against the Copernican expectation. The fifth turns outward to the reading of other skies, what counts as a biosignature and why the logic of disequilibrium is so seductive. The two recent cautionary tales, phosphine on Venus and DMS on K218b, that taught the field humility, and the twin traps of the abiotic mimic that fakes a signal and the false negative, the life we would fail to recognize. The sixth brings the search up close, to the ocean moons Europa and Enceladus, to Mars as the nearest test of a second Genesis, to the cold chemistry of Titan, and to the panspermia ledger, where I keep delivery apart from transport. The seventh takes up the search for others who might be searching, SETI and technosignatures, the Drake equation, the Fermi paradox, and the great filter, and renders the verdict. That verdict runs in three threads: the making of life, established in its parts and settings, a frontier in every program that would turn those parts into a living system, and closed by no one. The reading of other skies, the whole distance between a measurement and a meaning still uncrossed, a spectrum without a context being where the headlines go to die. And the listening, 60-odd years returning a plain and honest null, the wow. Signal never repeating, the candidates resolving to interference. Laid out in tears, the ledger reads plainly. Established is the parts and the settings, more than the field's detractors admit. Frontier is every route from the parts to the thing, and every attempt to read life in a distant atmosphere. Speculative is the tier that most tempts the imagination and least constrains it, chiefly the transport of living organisms between worlds. And what the evidence will not bear is any closing of the arch by decree in either direction, neither the confident abiogenesis that pretends the keystone is set because the abutment is exquisite, nor the despair that reads the gap as proof of impossibility. I owe one accounting in particular because it is where I am most tempted and must be most disciplined, the electric instinct that has run the spine of this whole series. Here it takes its strongest honest form anywhere in the 13 volumes. Life is, at bottom, a voltage and gradient process running against equilibrium. Miller's building blocks were forged by an electrical discharge. Every cell holds a membrane voltage the moment it has a boundary, and the vent theory makes the proton gradient the very engine of the origin. That much is real, and I credit it exactly. But I draw the line as hard as I know how at the point where the instinct reaches past mechanism into the mystical, because the honest fact and the overreach stand so close that the second discredits the first if they are not kept apart. That life runs on electricity is a claim about chemistry, not a claim that the cosmos is alive. So the arch is not closed, and I will not pretend otherwise from the winter anchorage where I began and end this book. The frost thickening white on the shrouds above black water. But something has genuinely changed, and it is why the volume is written in this decade rather than the next. For the first time, the instruments that could deliver a second example are on their way. To the ocean moons, to the Martian cores, to distant spectra. They may not arrive in time or ever. The nearest ocean may be sterile, and the flasks may stay stubbornly dead. I cannot tell you the keystone will be set. I can tell you the question is real, that it has not been closed by the confident people on either side, and that it will be answered, if it ever is, by measurement and not by longing.